Alright, y'all, so today I want to do a very quick review of Supergirl Volume 5, The Red Daughter of Krypton. This is an interesting volume. It basically presents the question of what if Supergirl got a Red Lantern ring? And basically kind of follows up through a storyline revolving that same premise. Now, going into this comic, I really didn't know what to expect. It's kind of a wild idea, right? One of the Kryptonians getting a ring, green, and in this case for Kara, red. It was just a super interesting and fascinating idea. So I wanted to check out this volume just because that's a really interesting premise. It's one of those cool things that comics does. It always likes to shake things up, writing-wise, creative-wise. So I'm going to get into my pros, my cons, maybe give a little bit of the story, and of course my overall thoughts on this. They kind of give you a brief rundown of the story. Kara, she's being affected by all the tragedies that she's had in the previous volumes of the New 52. She's experienced so much loss, so much rage, so much grief. And at some point, she gets sick of it, and then at some point a Red Lantern ring finds her, and she becomes a Red Lantern. She goes on this mindless destruction raid, because I believe when you get a Red Lantern ring, it turns you into this mindless, rage-filled beast until you got to go into this specific lake full of blood to sort of clear your head and regain your senses, so to speak. And that's exactly what happened here. She eventually gets caught by the Red Lanterns, which in this version is led by Guy Gardner. I know, sounds crazy. That's part of the New 52 run of the Green Lanterns. Hal Jordan eventually catches up to her. They try to figure out what to do. They initially talk to Superman. Superman's kind of like, I'll just let her do what she wants to do. And eventually she fights a world killer who's made out of gas or something, is able to wants a host for its body, basically wants a host and wants Supergirl as its body. She fights this world killer, ultimately sacrifices the ring, and eventually supposedly kills the world killer by throwing him into the sun, and then becomes Supergirl by the end of it. And there's a lot of, stuff that happens in between. Lobo shows up, Silver Banshee shows up. They do a lot of other stuff. I'm just giving you a very brief rundown of the basic points in the story. But my overall thoughts on this, man, I thought it was a really good and well-done comic story. One of the best the New 52 Supergirl has ever had, in my opinion. The Red Lantern ring mixed with Supergirl absolutely makes sense in the context of this series for the New 52 Supergirl. She's been a very angry person ever since the beginning of this series. She's experienced tragedy after tragedy. She even had to kill off her lover. She had to even experience Krypton's destruction again. It was a very tragic series of events, so you can believably assume that if a Red Lantern, which is a ring that's fueled, I believe, by rage and anger, not willpower like the green ones, it would be believable that she would accept the Red Lantern ring. And it's really interesting. It's really cool. I actually loved it so much that I wouldn't have minded if the series continued as her with a Red Lantern ring. But at the same time, the comic does make a point that if she keep having the ring, it probably would end up bad for everyone. But I thought it was really interesting how she would balance out, use the ring, how everyone in her life is trying to help her when really no one's really understanding her, right? No one's really getting what she really needs. And it's a really interesting dilemma. So yeah, I thought the story was really good. The art, like always, is really solid and really interesting and really good. The narrative is pretty good. I like a lot of the dialogue for the most part, especially how it's written with the Green Lanterns. It's really well done. It's very believable. The artwork, the action, it's all really done on a presentation standpoint. And I really like the story for the most part. And it felt believable. Now, I do think I have some issues with the story here and there. I don't think it's like a 10 out of 10 comic book, but, I like the idea of her fighting another world killer, another big enemy for her to fight. That's very interesting stuff. I do think it's annoying how Superman doesn't really do too much for her in the comic, but, excuse me, that's besides the point. I also really like the fact that, she chooses to be a Red Lantern and experience all the powers with that. She teams up with Guy Gardner, who's the leader of the Red Lanterns. That was a really cool aspect of the comic that I really liked. And I like how, ultimately she had to give it up, but she gives it up for a noble cause, and I really, really enjoy that. Um, and, I think it was just overall a really good storyline. Now to get into some of my cons, I think there's just some slight problems I have with it. I think, for one, they established in the beginning of the series there was really only 5 world killers. We all assumed the 5th one was Doomsday, but then another one shows up in this comic, and it kind of, I'm just, like I said, I'm kind of assuming Doomsday appears in the New 52, if I remember correctly, though in this weird Superman doomed event happens. That was a little bit strange, a little bit of a retcon kind of thing, but it was fine. Like, it's not a horrible thing. I did think, too, Guy Gardner leading the Red Lanterns and all the Green Lantern stuff, we just kind of get thrown in the middle of it. And the problem is, I really haven't read the New 52 Green Lantern as much because it's mainly a continuation of the previous run. And I just feel like it was a little bit jarring. I was like, whoa, Guy Gardner's really leading the Red Lanterns. And I eventually did some research and found out, that happened in the New 52 Green Lantern. And, it's just a bunch of stuff. I just would have liked if the comic gave maybe a quick little summary, backstory page. Same thing with the Doomed event, because she also shows up on Earth, and the Earth has been, there's like a kryptonite cloud over Earth, and there's been a kryptonite bomb over Kansas. That was part of the Doomed event. Once again, the comic doesn't really, like I said, I'm just assuming. I would have liked a little bit more context and background for that. But other than that, I thought it was really good. It was well done. It explores what a character like Kara, who's already full of rage, what the Red Lantern does to her. It enhances that rage, and, increases it tenfold, but also realizes that maybe this is not the answer. Rage and, exploiting others, I guess, for the simple purpose of rage, is not the answer. It was all really interesting stuff. I did think, dude, there was another storyline that was kind of going on at the same time with Supergirl's story, which revolved around a Red Lantern trying to get other Red Lanterns on board, and he was like the original creator of the Red Lanterns. I'm assuming that storyline got resolved in a later volume of the New 52 Green Lantern. It was just a little bit strange that it was brought up here and then it wasn't finished, but I just wanted to mention that. But I really enjoyed this comic. It was really well done. It was well executed. I like the premise. It makes a lot of sense in the context of the series. I do kind of wish they kept with this, actually. I would have loved to see more adventures as Kara, as the Red Lantern, Supergirl. It just would have been really interesting. It was a really cool divergence and a fresh new take on the material. But, I guess, like I said, it is a Supergirl series after all. They can't, I guess, have her be a Red Lantern forever. But I don't know. I just think it would be an interesting deviation for the character to go on. They could fully explore that. But overall, pretty great volume. Volume 5, Red Daughter of Krypton. I don't have too many complaints about this one like the previous volumes I've done. Highly recommend series. If you're trying to get into the New 52 Supergirl, I would recommend like the first 2-3 volumes, and then you can read the other ones, but I would recommend, you can jump to this one because it's really a standout. But yeah, my thoughts on Volume 5, Red Daughter of Krypton. All right, peace, y'all.